Friends, I want to start today with kind of the lay of the land because we are 21 days, just over 20 days from a presidential election. And if you're Kamala Harris, you're going on Brett Baer's show. Now there's a rumor she's trying to get on Joe Rogan's show. Your internal polling has got to show you have real problems, and you don't have a lot of time to fix them. I know you're not prone to doing this, but as I said on Friday, when you plan a campaign, you plan the campaign from Election Day backwards. We now have 3-4 more days this week. All of next week and the week after. By the Saturday before the election, ironically, the Day of the Dead, that is a campaign going on cruise control. But wait, there's more. You have about a week now until the 22nd to finalize anything that's really going to shake up the campaign. Now, in a tied race, and it is technically a tied race, you got a little more wiggle room. But all of your major advertising needs to be out the door by next Tuesday. Your mail pieces need to be prepared and out the door because God knows when the post office is going to deliver them. Your campaign then needs to set about turning out the vote, maximizing your voter turnout. Democrats still are missing Donald Trump going to California and New York. It had nothing to do with him. It had everything to do with saving House seats. He'd like to not to be impeached on day one. But all of the data right now points to momentum being in Donald Trump's favor. Again, before I begin here, this is very important. This is a tied race, technically. It is a tied race. But in being a tied race, the trajectory now points towards a Donald Trump victory and not a Kamala Harris victory. And the reason I can safely say it points to that is because the polling shows a decline in Harris's support. And what that decline comes from are Republican voters who do not like Donald Trump coming home to Donald Trump. Let me just give you the landscape right now. 21 days before the election, 60% of Americans believe the country is headed in the wrong direction. For the first time in 3 decades, more voters identify themselves as Republican than Democrat. Most Americans now believe that they got more benefits from the Trump administration than they are presently getting from the Biden-Harris administration. Donald Trump right now leads Kamala Harris on the economy and inflation, which pollsters treat as separate issues, immigration and crime. The top 4 issues for voters right now: economy, immigration, inflation, and crime. Donald Trump, in other words, is beating Kamala Harris on all 4 of those issues, and those are the 4 biggest issues voters care about. According to Gallup, 50% of voters believe the Republican Party will make them more prosperous compared to 44% for Democrats. 54% of voters believe the Republicans will keep the country safe from foreign threats compared to only 40% for Democrats. 55% of voters believe the government should do less. 55% of Americans favor less immigration, and a majority favor mass deportation of illegal aliens. More Americans favor Donald Trump to handle Israel and Ukraine appropriately. More Americans have a favorable impression of Donald Trump than Kamala Harris. Y'all, that's the data. That's not me. That's not my opinion. That's the data. That's the data from the Pew poll, from the Gallup poll, from the Ipsos poll, from the NBC poll, from the New York Times poll, the Washington Post poll. You name it. That is the combined data of all the polling out there. That is the polling blueprint for the next 3 weeks. Donald Trump wins on every issue voters care about. Donald Trump has higher favorability than Kamala Harris. Donald Trump's presidential administration favorability now has majority support of the public compared to the Biden-Harris administration. All of those signs point to a race that's not as close as the public polling shows. And not only that, but when you look at the candidates and what they're doing, the internal polling dynamics for Kamala Harris and her campaign right now must not be good. They have gone into full Looney Tunes mode on the Democratic side. You got Barack Obama on the campaign trail lecturing black men that they better get out and support Kamala Harris, which is wild to me that Barack Obama is going out and lecturing black men. And you know, the spin from Democrats, oh, they like to be lectured. I bet they don't. Nothing on the ground is adding up for Kamala Harris right now. If you're Kamala Harris and you're going on Fox News, a network that you don't think is your friend, what are you going for? I'll tell you what you're going for. The narrowing of the polls, the NBC News poll in particular, shows that Kamala Harris is beginning to lose ground with Republican voters who at one point thought they could vote for her. Listen to this from MSNBC.
You're exactly right. The timing of our poll is really instructive here. And when our September poll came out and had Harris with a 5-point lead over Donald Trump, that, of course, was after the debate. It was after a really rough news environment for Donald Trump with the discussion about Springfield, Ohio. And now, all of a sudden, we do show a tied race. And what has occurred is that those soft Republicans, non-MAGA Republicans, have come back home to Trump. In our September poll, they were lagging, obviously, after the debate, after the discussion of Springfield, Ohio. Our poll finds them that they are back with Trump, and that explains him going from 44% in our poll in September now to 48%. But, Joe, you ended up mentioning the things that Harris has to work on with shoring up Latino voters, getting African Americans in the fold, white women. Our poll ends up having a really big gender gap where Harris has a 14-point lead among female voters, while Donald Trump has a 16-point lead among male voters. That's overall a 30-point net gender gap. And what is kind of fascinating is that Trump's lead with men is slightly larger than Harris's lead with women. And if her ability to get back in a lead, national lead over Trump is being able to have a bigger lead among women than Trump's lead among men. And so a lot of those demographics, this is the last 3 weeks of the race. This is why you end up having mobilization and campaign to be able to juice your turnout, to shore up your weaknesses. And we're going to see what both campaigns have up their sleeves over the next 3 weeks.
You know, again, if she's losing men by a wider margin than she's losing women, women tend to turn out more than men. But in a presidential race, there can be parity. And Kamala Harris is not doing well among married women. This oftentimes gets missed by the press corps. Donald Trump and Mitt Romney both won married women, not women overall. A lot of single women out there who vote, but among married women, they did well. And Donald Trump is doing well with married women again this time against Kamala Harris. And then you've got, of course, Donald Trump and black voters. Here's Harry Inton over at CNN.
I mean, the bottom line is this. At this particular hour, if you believe the polling, Donald Trump's going to put up the best performance with black voters since Richard Nixon back in 1960. Not 68, since 1960. That's 64 years ago. Among Hispanic voters, Donald Trump's going to put up the best performance for Republicans since 2004 and George W. Bush.
Now, this is notable because listen to the conversation among Democrats. John Heilemann on MSNBC this morning.
Is that the Harris campaign finally allowed David Plouffe to go out and try to talk about the data on both Dan Pfeiffer's podcast on Pod Save America and in New York Magazine yesterday. And I will tell you that David Plouffe is he's a partisan and he fights for his team. But he is not a BSer. And if you read his assessment of the data, it is, I think, as clear, as both sophisticated and clear-eyed as anything anybody could say. And the two campaigns do not disagree about this. And what Plouffe basically says is, If you see a poll that has Harris up by 4 points, throw it in the trash. If you see a poll that has Trump up by 4 points, throw it in the trash. It's a tie race. This is uncomfortable for Democrats. It's a tie race. It's going to be a tied race all the way through to Election Day. It's going to be maybe the closest election of our lifetimes. Everyone is going to be scared if they care about the future of the country.
Again, I don't know that it. Yeah, the data shows it's a tied race, and I tend to trust the data. And the polling average, I trust. I don't trust the individual polls, and I know you guys don't trust the polls, but the polling averages historically are pretty good, and they show a tied race. But when you look at the tied race, and you look at how Donald Trump in all the tied race data still performs overwhelmingly well. I get that there's a dislike of Donald Trump, and any other Republican would probably be blowing it out of the water right now. But at the same time, I do wonder if the dislike of Trump is keeping some people from saying they're actually voting for Trump, even though they actually are. Like in 2016, where Donald Trump overperformed his polling. And in 2020, Donald Trump overperformed his polling. And in a tied race, I think that benefits Donald Trump. The fact that the Democrats are in this level of panic right now, you have Barack Obama lecturing black men. You have Kamala Harris going to Fox News and possibly Joe Rogan. You have Kamala Harris now sitting for more interviews. They've taken the bubble wrap off of her. While Donald Trump is going to California and New York, he's had multiple visits in Pennsylvania. The Democrats are maligning his rally in Pennsylvania, claiming he wandered around the stage for 45 minutes listening to music, pay no attention to the medical emergencies happening in the crowd. You've got CBS News and the other networks in full meltdown mode, going all neo-Nazi, racist, misogynist. Donald Trump is going to get you killed. Where's the joy? Where is the joy? This is not a joyful campaign. I'll tell you where the joy is. Joy Reid on MSNBC having a not quite normal vision of the future.
With these claims that Trump is surging with black and Latino voters and leading in every single swing state, according to secret internal polls, despite all the Hitler talk. Yes, this race will be far too close. Because unfortunately, we do have a fascist groundswell in parts of this country, mainly among white men, let's be clear, but in small pockets among black and brown men too. This happens to be a global phenomenon as women become more economically independent and seek positions of power.
You got that? Yeah, because women are economically independent now. The men are turning fascist, and it's black men too. That's why this is a tied race. That's not the joyful vibe of a winning campaign team. And I will tell you, privately, Democrats are bemoaning the fact that Kamala Harris is not gaining upward momentum. She's declining among key demographic groups she needs. This is why you're beginning to see a Democratic meltdown out there, and why her partisans are out there rushing to say, no, guys, it's really a tied race. It's really a tied race. It shouldn't be a tied race for Kamala Harris, because Donald Trump is disliked by a majority of Americans who say they're going to show up and vote, and yet they're still willing to vote for him. This has all the feelings of the end of the John Kerry campaign in 2004, where some of his aides were still super upbeat, but the reality was everyone in the press and the Democratic Party began to recognize he was not going to cross the finish line, and the panic and backbiting was starting 3 weeks before the election. We are 3 weeks before this election, and the panic and backbiting is starting in the Harris campaign. You do not hear people within the Trump campaign maligning each other, attacking each other, and blaming each other. That's coming from the Harris campaign, and that's what losing campaigns do. 3 weeks before the election, her team are acting like losers. In fact, her team is acting like Donald Trump is winning, and Donald Trump's team is acting like they're winning, and all of that is shifting the vibe. Harris claims she was surfing to victory. Kamala Harris is accused very credibly by Christopher Rufo of plagiarism. I would say it's not even an accusation at this point. The New York Times' own expert that they relied on said, yes, it's plagiarism in Kamala Harris's book that she wrote. She copied Wikipedia. Now, here's what you should know. Rand Paul several years ago gave a speech, and the New York Times made a very big deal of the fact that one of the things that Rand Paul said in his speech was lifted from Wikipedia without attribution. Now, what the New York Times is saying with this expert is, well, it wasn't that bad and it wasn't really fraud or maliciousness. Problem is that expert has now come forward and said, wait a second, guys, I haven't actually read the book or seen it. A New York Times reporter just called me and asked for my take on it, and I didn't know they were going to make me such a big part of the story. The reality is that Kamala Harris has been caught plagiarizing, which is something that destroyed Joe Biden's original presidential campaign back in the day. And now the New York Times is covering for it and saying it's a conservatives pounce story, not a legitimate story, that the sitting vice president of the United States of America plagiarized whole sections of Wikipedia. There are two reasons they are being this dismissive of it. Number one, they're on her team. Number two, if they pursue the story, it highlights how much they're on the team and the fact that the New York Times dropped the ball on doing due diligence of a vice president of the United States. Anyone else would have been vetted. You know who was? J.D. Vance. The New York Times interviewed the people that his book was based on and came away with him telling the truth, and yet still called into question his account. So J.D. Vance accurately writes a book without plagiarizing. The New York Times questions it. Kamala Harris writes a book where she actually plagiarizes, and the New York Times is like, it's no big deal because they're on her team. They have abandoned all pretense of trying to be fair. Phone number, if you want to be on the program, 877-973-7425. I really would like to encourage you to text the word Army to 33777 and sign up. If you are in Oklahoma, we are going to be in Tulsa the 2 days after, the Thursday after the election. And we're going to be doing a live event. I want to be able to get you information as to where we're going to be so you can RSVP. And easiest way is for you to text the word Army to 33777. We'll be doing these around the country. We'll also be able to give you action items. If you call Congress, call your state legislature over legislation as we flip the switches on this activism center and turn it on. Love to have you, though, but you got to text Army, ARMY, to the number 33777. Click that link. Just need your name, zip code, and email address, and we'll be able to engage with you. I got to go to the J.D. Vance, Martha Raddatz interview because it was galling. Martha Raddatz is at the top of her game at ABC News and just showed how out of touch she is with your average American. I don't even want to tell you what it is. And you may have seen the clip. I'm going to play the clip and then talk about it. This is J.D. Vance and Martha Raddatz on This Week on ABC News.
Senator Vance, I'm going to stop you because I know exactly what happened.
Martha.
I'm going to stop you. The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border? Americans are so fed up with what's going on, and they have every right to be. And I really find this exchange, Martha, sort of interesting because you seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent gangs. I worry so much more about that problem than anything else here. We've got to get American communities in a safe space again. And unfortunately, when you let people in by the millions, most of whom are unvetted, most of whom you don't know who they really are, you're going to have problems like this. Kamala Harris, 94 executive orders that undid Donald Trump's successful border policies. We knew this stuff would happen. They bragged about opening the border, and now we have the consequences, and we're living with it. We can do so much better, but frankly, we're not going to do better, Martha, unless Donald Trump calls this stuff out. I'm glad that he did.
Okay, let's just end that with they did not invade or take over the city, as Donald Trump said. I want to move on to
just a few
women.
Apartment complexes, no big deal.
Yes. Yes. Is the outrage that Donald Trump said they invaded and took over Aurora, Colorado, or is the outrage that they're here? They're here. The nitpicking of Trump on, okay, so they didn't take over the city. Why are they here? Why is this gang here? Y'all have heard of MS-13, the violent gang that's in this country. Law enforcement around this country says that this gang is far worse. This Venezuelan gang is far worse. Its overlords operate out of prisons in Venezuela, and many of those people who are in this country were in prisons in Venezuela. The regime there let them out, and they migrated here, and they're setting up shop in cities across America. A buddy of mine who works with the DEA, they've been on high alert about this gang. They are extremely violent. Not only is this gang extremely violent, this gang does what a lot of other gangs do not do. This gang targets local public officials and their families. You're the local mayor. If you don't turn a blind eye, we know where your kid goes to school, and we're not afraid to kill them. That's what this gang does. That's how they operate. Donald Trump makes a big deal about this gang being in Aurora, Colorado. By the way, El Paso, Texas, San Antonio. They're cropped up now in parts of Gwinnett County here in Georgia. And Martha Raddatz is upset that Donald Trump said they had taken over the town instead of just some apartment complexes. This is a damning indictment on Martha Raddatz in the American press. She lives in a comfy home in Northern Virginia. Who cares about these people in the apartment complexes? Donald Trump said something that wasn't quite true. She doesn't want to ask and exercise the intellectual curiosity of why are they there? How did they get there? Who is responsible for them being there? She just wants to dwell on the fact that Donald Trump said they'd taken over a city, and the mayor says that's not true. The governor says that's not true. Martha Raddatz gets a car service to take her to the studio, I bet. People in her position, they get car services. You've got to take public transportation, probably, where you are harassed with the homeless people and the schizophrenics. Remember in New York, Daniel Pennyman, the man dies. Daniel Pennyman is protecting the passengers on the train. And the New York Times and elsewhere, their position was, well, you expect that, Andre. You expect to be harassed by schizophrenics on subway trains. Never mind that some of those people at the New York Times, they get car services too. They don't have to be down there with you people. It's all about your station in life. Martha Raddatz gets security. You're not even allowed to have a gun. You're vilified for having one. Martha Raddatz gets a car service. You got to take the subway with the crackheads. Your apartment complex is overrun by a violent Venezuelan gang. Well, it doesn't affect Martha Raddatz in Northern Virginia, so who cares about you? This is a pattern with the American press corps. How dare you exaggerate that a Venezuelan gang that should not be here has set up shop around the country, not just in Aurora, Colorado. But let's meditate on that for a moment. Why are they here? They're here to expand their criminal enterprise. How did they get here? They crossed illegally into the United States of America. And now you know if Donald Trump says he wants to round them all up and deport them, well, that's Nazism. There's no win for you here. There's no win for Americans here. The Democrats tell us that they're here now and we can't get rid of them. It would be bad for our economy if you got rid of the violent gang members of this gang from Venezuela. It would be bad for us if we rounded up these people. I got to say something about J.D. Vance. I very much like J.D. Vance, even as I do think that a lot of his economic ideas are bad ideas. That they're warmed over democratic populism, big labor, economics. At the same time, he made a point with a New York Times reporter the other day that, a lot of businesses in this country, they're taking the easy way out. They're hiring the immigrant population that's come into this country, and they're saying, well, birth rate in this country is in decline, so we got to hire these immigrants. What about the people who've just dropped out and given up altogether? It is certainly more costly to bring an American in to do the job. You can pay the immigrant, oftentimes under the table, a lower wage. And a lot of these young American men are struggling with drug addiction and other issues. But also, aren't we all Americans? Shouldn't the company for the health and survival, not just of itself, but its community and its customers, be willing to invest some in training these young men, helping them overcome their addiction, giving them meaning in life? Because many of these young American men who've dropped out of the workforce, they just have no meaning. They have no value. They don't see the value in their life. You want a prosperous future society, you can't just keep importing immigrants to do the jobs, because at some point you're going to run out of customers. You need to build up the customer base as well. It just seems like we all need to make an investment, including American businesses, to make an investment in Americans. In this easy shortcut, what the Democrats are leaving out, what Martha Raddatz is leaving out, is this entitled elite sense of just giving up on Americans. They got fentanyl addictions. They don't read and write well. They're too dumb for a job we can get a Haitian to do. We can get the Haitian to do it for cheaper. There's this sense of corporate America, the media elite, the Democrats, they're just giving up on Americans. And I think that's one reason that Donald Trump is doing better than, frankly, he should be doing. If you're a Trump supporter, you don't like it when it's phrased that way, but it's true. He's doing way better than a guy like Donald Trump should be doing. But the reason is because most Americans, I think, do realize that Donald Trump hasn't given up on them. That's why the media goes through all sorts of extraordinary effort to try to convince you that Donald Trump really doesn't care about you. He's really in it for himself. He's taking advantage of you. And meanwhile, the media and the Democrats who say that they've completely given up on you. You want the Haitian? Fine. You don't want to pay for the drug recovery and give meaning in life to the white American kid in Ohio? That's fine. We'll bring in the Haitians. Got Martha Raddatz on ABC News saying, well, they haven't taken over the city. It's just some apartment complexes. Screw those people. I mean, it's Section 8 housing anyway. These are the Americans that we've given up on. So who cares about them? That's the attitude. That's not what she says, but it's the attitude she conveys of these are just poor Americans in Section 8 housing. They get what they deserve. The gangs have taken over there. Who cares where the gangs came from? We can't blame the Biden-Harris administration for this. We got to stop Trump. And it is why so many Americans are tuning out the press. It is why so many Americans are ditching Democrats right now. They've given up on the American dream for Americans and instead prefer to offer it to illegal immigrants, many of whom are gangbangers coming into this country, taking over apartment complexes. And because it doesn't affect the media, it's nowhere near where they live, the media is fine with it. They don't want to blame the Biden-Harris administration's policy failures, which is what led to it. No, instead, they'll blame Donald Trump for exaggerating. It's a detachment from the reality of the lived experience of most Americans. It is an arrogance from these members of the press. It's only a few apartment complexes, after all. But in those apartment complexes are American citizens who are there because oftentimes they have failed at life. They've made very poor decisions, but oftentimes they've been trying to get back on their feet and they have to rely on government help to do it. And now they live in a crime-infested neighborhood where they're not safe to leave their apartment complex and they can't get back on their feet. There are Americans who have failed at life, who've made terrible decisions and blame other people. They become conspiracy theorists. They don't want to get a good job. They can't get a good job. They got no desire to get a good job. They have no work ethic. But then there are a lot of Americans who would love to get a good job, but they need help. And the government's spending all of its money helping the illegals come into this country instead of helping the local Americans. And the big business decides I would rather invest in the illegal alien than invest in the American and get the American back on his feet. Who's for those people? Trump. That's how they've rationalized it, Trump. And the press corps and the Democrats don't seem to understand that. There are so many people who are voting for Donald Trump because he seems to be for them, while the American press corps and the Democrats say, it's just your apartment complex that has a gang, not mine. No big deal. It is a very big deal to those Americans. And those Americans, well, they're becoming members of Trump's coalition. And can you blame them? No, you can't. Greetings, conversationalists. Welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. If you text the word Erick to 33777, you can follow along with me and get the show notes. The phone number is 877-973-7425. I have an important housekeeping note for those of you listening in Georgia. If you text Army to 33777, Army to 33777. Fill out that link. Click the link, put in your name, zip code, and email address. A whole lot of people are calling saying, what do you think about these things on the ballot? What about my ballot? What about these questions on the ballot? I will write them up and send everybody an email. And let you know, my ballot should be here tomorrow. I got my absentee ballot. I got the text message that it was mailed out to me. Should be there tomorrow. So I will put a write up, and I will let you know what to think about how to vote on those ballot initiatives. Just text Army to 33777. I will send everybody in Georgia who signs up an email and give you all of that information. So just do that for me, please. Now, I got to turn to this election, and I got to read for you a statement. As you are probably aware, Donald Trump did 2 lengthy interviews over 90 minutes with Time magazine on his policy positions. Mark Benioff, who owns Time magazine, he's the Salesforce guy, super progressive, owns Time magazine. Donald Trump still did a 90-minute interview with them. Kamala Harris, who is someone that Benioff has donated to, hasn't sat with them. So they did a story, what kind of president would Kamala Harris be? And this is the most damning sentence in the entire story. And I quote, Harris declined repeated requests for an interview for this story. In contrast, Trump talked about his policy vision with a Time reporter for 90 minutes across 2 interviews. Donald Trump did. But wait, there's more. This is Bloomberg News in Chicago at an economic forum where Donald Trump went and Kamala Harris was invited.
The first is just for the record and for those people watching on television. The Economic Club of Chicago and Bloomberg both invited Vice President Harris to a similar interview about her economic plans that she has declined so far.
She's declined. Donald Trump went, and she didn't. What she has finally done, however, is to send out Bill Clinton and Barack Obama as surrogates. Now, I played this for you the other day, and I got to go back to it. This is Barack Obama on the campaign trail lecturing black men.
Makes me think, I'm speaking to men directly. Part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president. And you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for them. The women in our lives have been in our backs this entire time. They've been raising us and working and having our backs. And when we get in trouble and the system's not working for us, they're the ones who are out there marching and protesting.
So you got Barack Obama on the campaign trail lecturing black men. It was a big story over the weekend and into yesterday. Barack Obama's case for black men voting for Kamala Harris is, you better do it. Brothers better have her back. You better do it. It's just remarkable, absolutely remarkable, that this is the situation. We're 3 weeks from the election, and we were 3.5 weeks when he did it, and Barack Obama lecturing, in his words, the brothers about Kamala Harris and the need to vote for her. By the way, Kamala Harris is now out saying that she will find a way to give black men and only black men $20,000 interest-free loans from the government for their jobs and business if she gets elected. That would be unconstitutional. You can't do that as president of the United States. But she's out essentially offering to bribe black men with government money if they're willing to vote for her. It's absurd. But wait, there's more. She's also sent Bill Clinton out on the campaign trail. And Bill Clinton made such a great in-kind contribution to the Trump campaign. I'm stunned it's not already in an ad. Whoever you are who listens to this show for the Trump campaign, you need to go tell them, put this in an ad right now. This is Bill Clinton in Georgia talking about Laken Riley, the nurse who is in Athens, Georgia, a sanctuary city run by progressives where they refuse to do anything about an illegal alien until after he murdered her.
You had a case in Georgia not very long ago, didn't you? They made an ad about
the Clinton audio.
Young woman.
It sucks. I thought it was good audio. Nope. All right, well, I got the video, but the audio for Clinton didn't come through well for some reason. But what Clinton said is that if we had better border security, Laken Riley would still be alive. Yep, that's what Bill Clinton had to say. Bill Clinton sabotaging. Let me see if I can find a better clip of this. Bill Clinton sabotaging the campaign. It's just remarkable that he would go out there and say something like this in Georgia on the campaign trail on border security issues. It's unfathomable to me. And it looks like Donald Trump has already turned this into an ad. Good for him.
Long ago, didn't you? They made an ad.
I can't play you the audio of it. It's the Clinton clip for some reason. It's not working well. But nonetheless, Bill Clinton on the campaign trail saying that if we had vetted the illegal aliens and kept them from coming in, Laken Riley would still be alive. So you've got Barack Obama out there lecturing black men that you better go vote for Kamala Harris or else. And you got Bill Clinton in Georgia saying Laken Riley would be alive had the border been secured. Who didn't secure the border? I mean, people intuitively know this. And the Trump campaign's already turned this into a web ad that's played on YouTube and the like. The sabotage from these men isn't intentional. And here's the thing. I know how people's minds work, and I've already gotten the emails. There are people already out there saying, oh, they're trying to sabotage Kamala Harris now because they realize she'd be such a disaster. She'd be the end of the Democratic Party. No, they're not. And I realize you think you're smart and clever, but you're actually stupid for thinking that. Yeah, if you feel insulted, it's okay because you do. Someone never gave you the hard love to tell you you're stupid when you're trying to think of these 5-dimensional chess things. No, that's not really it at all. They actually think they're helping. See, Barack Obama believes that his star-studded celebrity power can get black men to go vote for Kamala Harris. You know what one Democrat told me? Black men like to be treated that way. That's right. Black men like to be harassed by their leaders. That's what they said. Bill Clinton really believes, if I'm just out there honest and candid about this, they're going to remember that Donald Trump's a liar. No, they're going to remember that Laken Riley is dead. That's what they're going to do. I will tell you this, though. There are Democrats who I have talked to in the last week who they are starting to say things like this. Well, if Donald Trump gets elected, the midterms will be brutal for you guys and we'll win. We might even pick up Georgia governor's race in 2026. And the Republican primary in 2028 against J.D. Vance will be so brutal, we'll probably take back the White House as well, and we'll be able to advance our agenda. We'll take back the Senate and the House, and we'll be able to get rid of the filibuster in 2028. Just we'll buy ourselves time. Trump will be a disaster. Well, that's what they're starting to tell themselves. That is a sign you know you're losing when you're beginning to rationalize it. That's not what Clinton's doing. That's not what Obama is doing. But they're beginning to rationalize it behind the scenes. It's always a dangerous, dangerous sign for a campaign when people are beginning to justify their own side's loss as, well, it'll be good for us in 2 years. It's a remarkable situation that Democrats find themselves in. And then you've got the Biden administration as its own worst enemy. So in the state of Virginia, you have to check a box that says you're an American citizen or you're not an American citizen. And if you check the box that says you're not an American citizen, you get booted from the voter registration process. And the Biden-Harris administration and all this other stuff, like in Riley, the gangs in Colorado, now they're suing the state of Virginia to stop them. This is his exchange with Jake Tapper on this.
Why not just honor that 90-day period?
Well, let me just first begin. It's anything but a purging program. It begins with someone identifying themselves as a non-citizen. And I guess I would posit back to you, do you think that non-citizens, when they've self-identified as a non-citizen, should stay on the voter roll and therefore be in a position to potentially vote in a presidential election?
I don't think any non-citizen should vote. How are they self-identifying? How does that happen?
They actually tick a box that says, I am a non-citizen, or they do not answer the question that they are a citizen, and therefore they self-identify that they are not a citizen in the United States of America. And this is why this is so out of bounds in my mind from the Justice Department. They fully understand this. They understand the process starts with a person self-identifying as a non-citizen, and then there is a match with that person's name on the voter rolls, and they are given not just one, but up to 3 times in order to try to cure it. And this is why I find this to be a very, very unreal moment that is stunning, that they filed this suit 25 days before a presidential election, when in fact this has been going on in accordance with our Constitution, the federal Constitution, and state law since 2006.
Yeah. Listen, Virginia is closer than it should be. You think stuff like this won't matter? It's kind of wild that this is where we are.
You got a case in Georgia not very long ago.
Kind of wild that the Democrats, at this point, just don't seem to be able to process that these sorts of things are fatal to a campaign. And yet, they're doing them. It's like the wheels have come off and everyone is just, the rats are fleeing from the ship and they're all rushing forward, trying to advance an agenda that it's not working for them. Everybody's just trying to do their own thing now. There's no coordination. So you got Bill Clinton out there on the Lake and Riley situation. You got Barack Obama out there lecturing black men. You got the Justice Department out there suing the state of Virginia. By the way, there's a story in Axios that the Harris team is furious with the Biden team for not coordinating these sorts of things with the Harris team. She's not the president of the United States. She doesn't get that level of support, and yet she's upset. She thinks she demands it. The Democrats at this point are undermining themselves. Normally at this time, it's the Republicans doing it. Normally, it's the Republicans shooting themselves in the foot and snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. And right now, it looks like the Democrats are on the verge of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. It is a wild thing to witness. Just how off message they all are. And you got to understand, and I realize some of you you can't help yourself but try to rationalize it through the stupidest framing possible. I say this lovingly to my audience, but y'all, come on, you know who I'm talking about. So, oh no, they're trying to sabotage her. They don't want her to get elected. They know it's going to spell doom for the Democratic Party. No, they want the power. They want the power. They think it's manageable and fixable. They want the power. They don't want Trump to be in the White House. At this point, though, they all have different opinions on how to stop him, and that's a testament to how badly they think the Harris campaign is being run. They're all just trying to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks at this point, which is no way to win a campaign. You know, I have been in seminary, and the main reason, in fact, the reason I went to seminary is because I kept getting asked to preach on Sundays. And now I never do. And I get it. This is my pulpit. And I think as much as people would kind of revolt if they heard the political talk radio show guy in the pulpit on Sunday, I don't want my pastors getting political on Sunday. I don't. Interestingly enough, there's a great study out. You know which churches get the most political on Sundays? Progressive theological churches. Notice how the media is always lecturing evangelicals about being too political, and yet the data actually suggests you're more likely to hear about current politics in a liberal church than a conservative church. But of course, the media is okay with that because they align politically with those guys on the left. And the IRS has always given far more latitude to Democrats in churches, particularly in black churches, than they have evangelicals who've always been more careful. But the lines are starting to blur, and more people are getting engaged in politics in the pulpit. I don't want to hear politics from the pulpit at my church, but progressives sure do. I was going to say this for later, but let me play this clip, which has made the rounds. This is Scott Jennings. He was on CNN the other day. I want you to hear what he says, but also the reaction to what Scott Jennings says on CNN.
Records given who the current president of the United States is.
What about your nominee?
That's number one. Let me finish. You got Scott. Number two, I think the polling this morning and the week, I think David's right. It was a rough week. I mean, her faves are down. They're struggling with, the front page of the New York Times this morning, front page story. Democrats struggling with African-American voters, particularly African-American men. This gender gap issue is real. It's a real problem, and you see the Democrats reacting to it. And I think what they are now finally in October of the election coming to realize is that a lot of men think Democrats care more about dudes who want to become women than dudes who just want to be dudes. And no hunting, cosplay, or cringy videos is going to change it. The bet is made.
Wait, no, you can't. Yeah, you can, and he's right. Democrats care more about men who want to become women than men who are men. And the cringy video, which, by the way, turns out was a producer of Jimmy Kimmel's who put this together with a group of comedians, some stoner friends of his, the I'm a man, I'm not afraid of bears. We're not sure if he means like burly gay men or actual animals in the woods, but the whole video was just nuts. Democrats have real problems. And there's a theme. The Wall Street Journal pointed this out today. It's the trans issue. There's a lot of polling. There's a lot of data. There's a lot of one-on-one interviews with voters and focus groups that this issue actually does matter. And it sticks in the craw of voters that most voters, their position is this. If you want to go out and have had a dickectomy or whatever, you want to surgically alter your body to conform to the gender of your choice. Most Americans take the live and let live, have at it position. But when you then decide that you want your kid to go through the procedure and play in a girl's sport and deprive an actual biological girl of a potential scholarship to college, people take it personally. People do not like it. And it's showing up as a sleeper issue in this country. Colin Allred, who's running against Ted Cruz, there's this big fear out among Republicans that Ted Cruz can lose. I kind of think it's like Beto O'Rourke. He'll win by the skin of his teeth. I mean, listen, I like Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is a friend of mine, but Ted Cruz comes across as deeply unlikable to a lot of people. I get it, but he'll win. And the Democrats will dump money in there and deprive other races of money. They'll deprive Tammy Baldwin of money in Wisconsin, and she'll lose. They'll deprive Sherrod Brown money in Ohio, and he'll lose. And Colin Allred will lose, but he'll lose close. There's just not a universe in which Donald Trump wins Texas and Ted Cruz loses Texas. And Donald Trump is going to win Texas. But Colin Allred has had to come out forcefully and respond to an attack that he supports boys and girls sports, and he does, by the way. Sherrod Brown does as well. They're both being attacked for it, and it's moving the needle with suburban moms. It is an issue that resonates with voters. And if you're a Democrat, if you're in the press, you don't recognize it. You think that these normal Americans are bigots. Part of the problem is, as I mentioned the other day, the Democratic Party is a party of deeply mentally ill people who are fueling their public policy positions with their own neuroses, their own anxieties, their own disorders. They are neurotic. They think the world is coming to an end. Let's just go back to the prior data point here. So you are more likely to hear a sermon on politics in a progressive church than in a conservative church. And in so doing, those pastors pursue a heaven or hell on earth position that you must make the world clean. You must fight climate change. You must cause nature to heal. You must do your part. My buddy Ryan, who's a meteorologist, says we could probably shave a half a degree Celsius off global temperatures if you just moved the temperature probes out of urban heat islands to more rural areas where they used to be. But the left is just neurotic, and they've got these compulsions, and they want to drive public policy on these. And Americans would rather go with people who think the government can steer hurricanes than people who think that boys can become girls and want all of us to pay for the surgeries. The neuroses of the Democrats running that party are causing that party to lose. And what is more interesting to me is that the media is so in the bubble and so caught up in these neuroses and anxieties as well that they can't really cover it accurately. They can't really see that it's happening. And yet it is. And there are not going to be a majority of black men voting for Donald Trump. Donald Trump will not win a majority of black men, but he doesn't have to. He just has to improve his standing, and right now he's on the verge of doing so. And part of that is because these younger black men, they also don't want to be caught up in the neuroses of the Democrats and the phobias of the Democrats and these psychological turmoil of the Democrats. They don't want to vote for crazy, and these are crazy people in the Democratic Party, and Kamala Harris is the leader of the crazy right now. They want to attack Donald Trump for his mental foibles and his age. These are the same people who covered it up for Joe Biden. It's all about raw power to impose their neurotic demands on the rest of us, and people don't want to vote for a bunch of crazy people who want to impose their will on everybody. Look, with Election Day, there's more than just the president on the ballot. You got in many states, United States Senate races. Some states have gubernatorial races. You've got U.S. Congress races, state legislative races, local races in some cases. It is important to go vote. Over in Athens, Georgia, Clark County, Georgia, they're going to have an independent candidate running for district attorney, I think, against the super woke DA. And people have got to show up and they've got to be able to vote. And just because you can't stomach Harris and Trump doesn't mean you should stay home. Local races matter too. So get out and vote if you can. There are also in many states constitutional amendments that will fundamentally change the future of your state. Like here in Georgia, there's an amendment for a new tax court system, which I support. I'm going to vote for that amendment because it'll allow tax and business specialists to handle those laws and make our state more competitive against other states, more business friendly than a lot of states that are out there right now. I support that, but don't sit home because you think, oh, it's Harris and Trump and I hate them both and I refuse to vote. You got state legislatures on the line. You got constitutional amendments. You got senators, you got congressmen. Go vote, folks. Go vote. Exercise your constitutional prerogative to vote and be a good steward of your vote. Be a good steward of your state. And listen, let's say you go through and you're like, I don't know any of these people. Okay, what about the constitutional amendments? What about your local people who you might know? If you don't show up, you don't get to vote for any of them. So be engaged and go vote, please go vote. Those of you in Georgia, remember, if you text Army to 33777, put in your email address. I will send you an email about the ballot questions. We're getting a lot of phone calls from the audience in Georgia, and I will analyze them. I got to vote for them too, so I'll tell you how I'm voting on that stuff. Text Army to 33777. Now, I gotta get into, well, what's happening with the Democrats right now. And again, you know, I like I said on Friday, I don't mean to make these all like political shows. There's so much other news out there, but this kind of is the biggest news out there, and they're not handling their current situation well. And you should also understand that Democrats are increasingly nervous about the United States Senate. And all of this is weighing in on candidate concerns, among other things. Senator Mitch McConnell's campaign PAC is warning Republicans not to get overconfident right now in the Senate, but also the trend lines do look fantastic in Montana. Obviously, we're going to win in West Virginia. Candidate quality matters in Arizona. We're going to lose that seat, Kerry Lake, terrible candidate. Republicans in Arizona seem to be suicidal out there when it comes to picking good candidates. But, I mean, Wisconsin, the trend lines are there for Hovde. McCormick is now a point behind in internal polling, even among Democrats in Pennsylvania. Mike Turner looks like he is ahead now in Michigan. Bernie Moreno looks like he might be pulling ahead in Ohio. Republicans may be able to make up some good ground game in the Senate. And the Democrats, well, they're not really having a normal moment here anymore. This is Maria Cardona on CNN, and just listen to the fear scenarios these Democrats are starting to paint.
But what I'm saying is that the polls that actually have very robust numbers of Latino voters, right? The sample sizes need to be large and robust in order to get the numbers correctly. They have to do bilingual polling as well. A lot of the national polls don't do that. So that's why it's better to focus on the myriad, it's not just one, myriad of polls that know how to poll Latino voters, that have her in the mid to low 60s, which is where she needs to be. Absolutely, she's going to continue to go out there and talk about how she is the one that will fight for Latino voters. There's only one candidate here that wants to keep families together.
We're now getting the arguments of, well, actually, you can't. All of these polls, they're wrong. Only my polls are right, and this level of hysteria as well. Again, Maria Cardona on CNN.
The same voters are his voters, and his voters are going to believe anything and everything that comes out of his mouth. If you are somebody who was looking at what happened on January 6th, even from the range of the political spectrum, from Republicans to Democrats, you looked at that with horror, and you looked at that knowing that Donald Trump was the one who was actually inflaming that and did nothing to stop it. That's not the only thing, Abby. Donald Trump ripped babies from the arms of their mothers. Because of Donald Trump, there is a generation of orphans in this country.
Fact
check. He has said that he would do that
fact
again.
check. Where's the fact check at CNN? The generation of orphans in this country. Because of Donald Trump, he ripped them from their mother's hands. Actually, this was to stop the human traffickers. Put a little asterisk there on the human traffickers. And then there is, I played this for you earlier, this again, Joyless Reed from MSNBC.
With these claims that Trump is surging with black and Latino voters and leading in every single swing state, according to secret internal polls, despite all the Hitler talk. Yes, this race will be far too close. Because unfortunately, we do have a fascist groundswell in parts of this country, mainly among white men, let's be clear, but in small pockets among black and brown men, too. This happens to be a global phenomenon as women become more economically independent and seek positions of power.
Joyless Reed lecturing everyone about the Nazi talk. This isn't the sound of people winning. it's not a hopeful message. If you vote for Donald Trump, it's the Nazis. Except, this is the problem that the Democrats seem to continually find themselves in, is people lived through Donald Trump's first term, and where were the Nazis? Oh, I'm sure Democrats can throw out clever little one-liners like Charlottesville and things like that, but really, where's the Third Reich? Americans actually have a more fond impression of those 4 years than they do now of Joe Biden's. I mean, you didn't have the racist Hitler Nazi talk. In fact, what you did is you had an American media that so bought into the narrative that they kept losing defamation suits like Nick Sandmann, because they were so eager to portray him as a little racist at a pro-life event when he was actually the victim. And he sued and he won. The bubble that the press and the Democrats reside in, it's just not reflective of what's going on out there. And they're starting to panic, and they're starting to scream Nazi. They're starting to scream Hitler. They're starting to scream racism. They're starting to scream all these things. Doesn't pan out. I want to go back to this Maria Cardona clip, though. Let me play this for you again. This again, Maria Cardona on Abby Johnson's show on CNN.
The same voters are his voters, and his voters are going to believe anything and everything that comes out of his mouth. If you are somebody who was looking at what happened on January 6th, even from the range of the political spectrum, from Republicans to Democrats, you looked at that with horror, and you looked at that knowing that Donald Trump was the one who was actually inflaming that and did nothing to stop it. That's not the only thing, Abby. Donald Trump ripped babies from the arms of their mothers. Because of Donald Trump, there is a generation of orphans in this country, and he has said that he would do that again.
You got that? Ripped orphan, a generation of orphans. You know why Donald Trump separated children from adults coming across the border? Human trafficking. Human trafficking. Were these really their parents? This is from the Free Press. Deep inside the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services resides a tiny agency called the Office of Trafficking in Persons. A large part of its mission is to help survivors of sex and labor trafficking rebuild their lives and become self-sufficient. Among other things, it offers food assistance, medical benefits, and cash to migrant minors who have been trafficked but have managed to escape. Once their eligibility to obtain benefits is approved, they receive a document called the Child Eligibility Letter. Although the number of child eligibility letters the government issues is supposed to be public information, it became available on the trafficking office's website only after filing a Freedom of Information Act request. The numbers confirm trafficking has increased a lot since Joe Biden took office. During the 4 years of the Trump administration, the government issued an average of 625 letters per year to migrant minors who had managed to break free from their traffickers. But in 2021, the first year of the Biden administration, the number jumped to 1,143. In 2022, it jumped again to 2,226. Last year, the number stood at 2,148, but that was only through September. The fourth quarter hadn't yet been counted. To put it another way, forced labor and prostitution among underage minors more than tripled under President Biden, reaching record highs. And that only counted the handful who had escaped, not the thousands who were being held by the traffickers. The sex trafficking of minors and human trafficking as a whole is one of the fastest growing criminal enterprises in the United States, says Homeland Security Investigations Special Agent in Charge Mark Dawson, after a big bust in Houston last year that saw the arrest of 10 traffickers, all of whom had gang connections. Sex trafficking victims often suffer horrific abuse, as the reporter discovered when she spoke to Landon Dickinson, the 36-year-old executive director for Bob's House of Hope in Denton, Texas, the only shelter for male sex trafficking victims aged 18 and up in the country. Dickinson said they've seen teens from Central and South America who've been so tortured by their traffickers, they are barely functional. Dickinson describes caring for teens who have brain damage from being so heavily drugged, teens who've had their fingernails pulled out and lemon juice poured on the wounds. When I interviewed one of their migrant residents, Dickinson said they simply weren't in any condition to speak to anyone, much less a reporter. We think the cartels and gangs use torture as a control method for the males. They're not going to fight back if they chain their victims to a radiator, beat them up frequently, or drug them. The House of Hope residents often come branded or tattooed by the cartels and gangs who traffic them, and most were cross-victimized, used as drug mules, as well as for labor and sex. Bob Williams, CEO and founder of Bob's House of Hope, said they receive 2 to 3 calls a month to help minor males who have been sex trafficked. There's not one shelter in the country for 12 to 17-year-olds, he said. This is a big problem because they get put in the system and don't get the help they need. Williams, who was sexually assaulted as a teen himself, says they're working on procuring more funding to build a program for minors. There's no question the border crisis is the primary reason for the increase in the sex trafficking of migrants. Here's how it works. When underage migrants cross the border unaccompanied by a family member, they're sent to a temporary holding facility run by one of a number of nonprofit organizations out there. The NGOs are expected to move the migrants out within a couple of weeks because there's so many more coming in right behind them. During the time the migrants are in the holding facilities, both the non-governmental organizations and the government are supposed to vet the people who will take them when they depart. These people are called sponsors, and the vast preference of everyone in the system is that they be relatives, but sometimes they don't have a family sponsor, which gives the cartels and gangs an opening. They pretend to be legitimate sponsors. It's a massive uptick. Maria Cardona is more worried about the politics of this than the actual lives. She wants to talk about orphans being ripped from their mothers. Pay no attention to the statistics of what's happening here. Many cases, these young people who are coming to this country aren't with their parents. They're not being ripped away from their mother. They're being ripped away from their abuser. And yet the Democrats want to lecture us on Donald Trump being a Nazi. The Democrats want to lecture us on the racism. The Democrats want to lecture us about kids in cages. Pay no attention to the human trafficking. It's a very, very real problem. And again, I want to point out to you that last year, we only have the data through September. It was about 2,200 young people, migrants who were trafficked that the government gave assistance to. That's 2,200 young people who escaped and then found help to get the resources to do this. 2,200. They escaped and found the resources for help. How many escaped and didn't find the resources? How many have not escaped? The number has gone up. It was just over 600 when Donald Trump left office. You're at 2,200 just through September of last year. This is happening around us, in our cities, in this country, because the Biden administration has maintained an open and porous border and then made it very easy for people to come in here and set up shop. And you got people like Martha Raddatz saying, well, it's just a few apartment complexes. And how many thousands of victims of slavery happening in this country right now that she doesn't even care to ask about because, well, it's not happening in her neck of the woods. It's out there in Aurora, Colorado.